Hey everyone, and welcome back. It's amazing how much we all crave that feeling of being truly accepted. Like seriously, think about it. New job, social group, heck, even just a dinner party, that deep down desire to click with others, it's huge.
Totally. Our brains are practically wired for that connection,
Yeah.
right? And that sense of belonging, it goes way beyond just fitting in. It's actually crucial for our well-being.
Yeah, totally. Feeling like we belong is super important. But get this, there's this wild research study called, let me get it right, Unmet Expectations. Social inclusion and the interaction between social anxiety and ambiguous or positive feedback. It seriously flips the script on, like everything we thought we knew about what it means to feel accepted.
Yeah, it's a total game changer. It really digs into the difference between just being included, which, we all kind of assume is the goal, and then there's this whole other level they call preferential inclusion. It's way more interesting than it sounds.
Okay, so picture this. You're starting a new job, joining a brand new team. What would you say is more important to you? Just being included, like you're there, part of the group. Or is it more important to actually feel like the team wants you there,
Yeah.
values you being there?
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of preferential inclusion comes in. The researchers actually used this really clever little game to figure all this out called Cyberball. You ever heard of it?
Cyberball, maybe. It's like virtual dodgeball, but less painful. Refresh my memory. I need the details.
All right, so imagine this. You're online, right? And you're playing this virtual ball-tossing game with 3 other people. In the basic cyberball setup, everyone gets the ball tossed to them pretty equally. So you're included, you're part of the game, everything's cool.
Yeah, it sounds pretty inclusive so far. As long as no one's like throwing the ball AT me, I'm feeling good.
Exactly. But here's where the researchers took things up a notch, spiced things up a bit. They called this the Uber ball condition.
Uber ball. Like now we're talking, that's way more interesting. What's the catch?
So in Uber ball, picture this. You're playing for a bit, right? And then all of a sudden, 2 of the players, they start throwing the ball only to you. So you're still included, but now you're the star player.
Whoa, hold on. Everyone wants to play with ME. Suddenly I'm feeling pretty popular. Aha. I see where this is going.
Exactly. And that's the whole point. Get this. This is amazing. The people in the Uber Ball setup, those experiencing that preferential inclusion, they walked away with way higher feelings of belonging, self-esteem, even like a sense of meaning in life.
Yeah.
Crazy, right? Especially compared to the regular cyberball group.
That's wild. So it's not enough to just be included, is it? Like we crave being sought out, being chosen.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about those group settings where you're there, physically present and all, but not really feeling the love,
100%. This study shines a light on how much we really crave those little signals, those signs that we're valued, that we're chosen, truly part of the group, not just along for the ride. We want to feel like we matter.
So we're not just talking about getting invited to the party, are we? It's more like being asked to dance.
Yes.
Like someone actually wants to engage with you. And, okay, I got to ask, what about those of us who already feel a little unsure of ourselves in social situations? People with social anxiety, for example. I'm guessing this whole preferential inclusion thing is even more important for them, right?
You hit the nail on the head. That's actually a key part of what the researchers were looking at. And their findings on social anxiety, well, let's just say they add a whole other layer to this whole thing. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Okay, so walk me through it. What did they find? How does social anxiety play into all of this?
So it's kind of counterintuitive. But the study found that for people with higher levels of social anxiety, receiving positive feedback and then being included in just a normal average way, it actually had a negative impact on them.
Whoa, seriously. You're telling me that for someone who's already worried about being accepted, getting good feedback, and then being included like everyone else made them feel worse? That doesn't really make sense.
Seems strange, right? Like the opposite of what you'd expect. But that's what the data shows. One way to think about it is this whole idea of unmet expectations.
Unmet expectations. Okay, I'm listening.
So think about it. Positive feedback. It's like a burst of hope, right? It can really raise someone's expectations, especially someone who's already a little unsure of themselves socially. So when they get that positive feedback, they might start hoping for like this really high level of acceptance, And then when they experience just ordinary inclusion afterwards, it feels kind of disappointing.
I get it. It's like they got a taste of that preferential inclusion, that feeling of being truly valued, and then it's snatched away. So then ordinary inclusion, even though it's perfectly fine and normal, it just doesn't live up to those expectations that were set earlier.
Exactly. And that gap between what they expected and what they actually experienced, that's where those negative feelings can creep in. It's like for someone with social anxiety, being treated just like everyone else might actually make them feel less accepted, not more,
Right.
because it kind of reinforces those fears they have about not truly belonging.
Wow, that is such a good point. It's like they're almost looking for reassurance that they do belong, that they are valued, and just being treated normally doesn't quite cut it. They need that little something extra to really feel secure.
Exactly. And it highlights just how important it is to be sensitive to individual differences in social settings. What feels inclusive to one person might not feel that way at all to someone else, especially someone who's dealing with social anxiety.
It's like we all have these different sensitivities and triggers, and what might seem like a totally harmless interaction to one person could actually be really loaded for someone else. It's a good reminder to, never assume we know what's going on in someone else's head, right?
Exactly. And that's something we can all work on. Paying attention to those subtle cues, being more mindful of how our actions might be perceived. It can go a long way in creating an environment where everyone feels truly comfortable and welcome.
Okay, so we've talked about how important it is to be aware of these different needs and sensitivities, but how do we actually do that? How do we become more attuned to those subtle cues and make sure we're creating those preferentially inclusive experiences, especially for people who might be struggling with social anxiety? Give us the actionable advice.
You got it. It starts with recognizing that people with social anxiety, they're often super attuned to those subtle signs of inclusion and exclusion. It's like they're hyper aware of the social dynamics. So for them, being treated just like everyone else can actually backfire.
Yeah, it's like that whole, if you can't spot the sucker at the poker table, you're the sucker thing.
Yeah.
Except in this case, it's if you're hyper aware of every social cue, every interaction feels like a poker game. And that can be exhausting.
Exactly. And that's where those small intentional acts of preferential inclusion, they can make a world of difference. Like a genuine compliment, remembering a detail someone shared with you before, making eye contact during a conversation. Those little things, they speak volumes, especially to someone who might be doubting their place in the group.
It's like you're sending this message that says, hey, I see you, I hear you, I value you. And for someone who's feeling a little invisible, that can be huge. It's all about making them feel seen and heard, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about being nice, although that's always a good thing, right? But there's actually a ton of research showing that diverse and inclusive teams, they're just flat out better, more effective, more productive, more innovative. When everyone feels comfortable being themselves, that's when the magic happens.
So it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Now, I know this study focused specifically on social anxiety.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling these findings apply way beyond that, don't they? Like we're all walking around with different backgrounds, experiences, ways of seeing the world.
You're totally right. Think about cultural differences, neurodiversity, even just, personality differences. What feels welcoming to one person might totally not land the same way for someone else, like assuming that everyone experiences inclusion in the same way. It's a recipe for misunderstandings and missed connections.
It's like I might show affection by giving someone a hug, but someone else might be totally uncomfortable with that.
Right.
It's not that one way is right or wrong. It's just different. We all have different needs and preferences when it comes to feeling included.
And it's about creating spaces where those differences are not just tolerated, but actually celebrated. Because a lot of times it's in those differences that we find the most creative solutions and the most innovative ideas. That's the beauty of true inclusion. It helps everyone thrive.
I love that. Okay, before we go too far down this rabbit hole of inclusion in all its forms, I want to circle back to the study for a sec. I'm curious about how they actually measured these feelings of belonging and self-esteem. Because, those seem like pretty subjective things, right?
Yeah.
How do you put a number on feeling accepted?
That's such a good question. So they use something called, get ready for it, self-report measures. Basically, people answered questionnaires, rating how much they agreed with statements like, I felt like I belonged to the group, or I felt liked and worthy, that kind of thing. These are standard tools that researchers use all the time to get a handle on those inner experiences we all have.
So it's not like they were just asking people to describe their feelings willy-nilly, right? They were using established methods to try and capture those really nuanced emotional responses.
Exactly. And sure, self-report measures have their limitations, like any research method. But when you combine them with, say, behavioral observations like, how people actually acted in that cyberball game, you can start to get a much clearer picture of how those different forms of inclusion are impacting people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
It's like you're piecing together a puzzle.
Yeah, right.
Each piece of information gives you a little bit more of the overall picture. And it sounds like this study was pretty solid in terms of its methods, like a good sample size, controls for other factors. They even replicated findings from earlier research to make sure it all held up.
Totally. And all of that just gives us more confidence that their findings are legit. This isn't just some random one-off study. It's building on a whole body of evidence about the power of preferential inclusion to actually shape our experiences. Like, this is real stuff.
This is brain science, people. It's not just a feeling. All right, so we've covered a ton today, from like virtual ball tossing to, the importance of metaphorical cookies. But I think the big question everyone's wondering is, how do we actually become more preferentially inclusive? It's one thing to get the concept right, but actually changing our behavior, that's a whole other thing.
Oh, absolutely. It definitely takes conscious effort to shift from just being inclusive on that surface level to really creating those experiences where people feel truly seen, truly valued. It's a more mindful approach.
So where do we even start? Give us the goods.
Well, I think a great place to begin, honestly, is with ourselves. Like, a little self-reflection goes a long way, We can all take a moment and ask ourselves, okay, am I creating an environment where the people around me, do they actually feel valued, respected? And maybe even more importantly, am I really going that extra mile to make sure people feel seen and heard, especially those who might be a little quieter, a little less likely to speak up on their own?
Those are really good questions to ask ourselves. Seriously, we should all be checking in with ourselves about that pretty regularly. And it just hit me, this isn't just about like group settings either, right? It totally applies to those one-on-one interactions too.
Oh, for sure. You're absolutely right. I mean, think about it. Think about the difference between someone who's like half listening to you while they're scrolling through their phone versus someone who is totally present, making eye contact, asking questions, really engaged in what you're saying. The difference in how valued you feel in those two scenarios, it's huge.
It's night and day. It's the difference between feeling like an afterthought and feeling like a priority. I think we could all stand to be a little more mindful of how we show up in those everyday interactions, like putting our phones away, really tuning in when someone's talking, just like making that effort to actually connect. Those little things, they make a huge difference.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And here's the thing. If you're the one who's feeling a little invisible, a little left out of the loop in a group or a conversation, don't be afraid to speak up. Advocate for yourself. It's totally okay to let people know what you need in order to feel included.
Sometimes people just need a little nudge in the right direction.
Yeah.
It's not about being demanding. It's just about being honest about what you need. Like saying something like, hey, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Or, hey, would you mind if we put our phones away during lunch so we can actually catch up? Just like a little invitation to connect more deeply.
Exactly. Good communication is like the bedrock of any strong relationship. And creating a sense of belonging, that's a huge part of what makes relationships strong, whether it's at work, at home, with friends.
It really highlights how inclusion, it's a two-way street, isn't it? It's not just on the people who are like naturally more inclusive to do all the work. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels empowered to voice their needs and advocate for themselves, and where we all take responsibility for creating that sense of belonging together.
100%. It's a collective effort, for sure.
It makes me think about how much we talk about diversity and inclusion these days.
Yeah.
And for good reason. But what this study really highlights is that diversity is just the first step. It's the inclusion part, that active, intentional effort to make everyone feel like they truly belong. That's what allows diversity to actually thrive. It's not enough to just have different voices at the table. Those voices need to feel heard.
Yes. Diversity without inclusion. It's like, I don't know, having a symphony orchestra with all the instruments, right? But no conductor. You might have all this incredible potential, but it's the inclusion. That's what brings it all together. That's what makes the music.
Such a good analogy. And, just like learning to play an instrument or conduct an orchestra, right? Of creating truly inclusive environments. It takes practice. It's not always easy, but man, the payoff is huge when we get it right.
It really is. And, the more we practice, the better we become at recognizing and responding to those little cues, those subtle moments of connection and disconnection that we might have missed before. It's about like building those social awareness muscles, becoming more attuned to the people around us.
I love that we're ending on such a hopeful note. It's empowering to realize that we actually have the power to make a real difference, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of the people around us, just by being a little more intentional, a little more mindful about inclusion. It's not about these grand gestures. It's about those small, consistent acts of connection that really add up over time.
Absolutely. And imagine the ripple effect, right? If we can each create these little pockets of true belonging in our families, our workplaces, our communities, that's how we start to shift the culture as a whole.
What a powerful thought to leave us with today. So listeners, here's a little challenge for you. As you go about your day, pay attention. Pay attention to those little moments of connection and disconnection. What can you do today to make someone feel a little more seen, a little bit valued, a little more truly included? Food for thought, and thanks for joining us on this deep dive.